गजाननं भूतगणादिसेवितं कपित्थजम्बूफलचारुभक्षणम् उमासुतं शोकविनाशकारकं नमामि विघ्नेश्वरपादपङ्कजम्। शुक्लाम्बरधरं देवं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। A very good afternoon to one and all present on this virtual platform in which Amity School of Liberal Arts is organizing a webinar today, titling Using Descriptive Statistics in Humanities Research. And for this webinar, our today's resource person is Dr. S.N. Sridhara, Director, Amity School of Engineering and Technology, Amity University, Haryana. Before the session begins, I would like to request Professor Sanjay Kumar Jha, Director, Amity School of Liberal Arts, Amity University, Haryana, to deliver the welcome address and opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Supriya. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, with greetings of the day, let me at the outset extend a very warm welcome to all of you. In the pursuit of its academic excellence, Amity School of Liberal Arts has been organizing a series of expert lectures every fortnight on research methodology for our PhD, master, and undergraduate level researchers. In this direction, today we have assembled on this virtual platform not only to see statistical aspects of research in humanities, but we shall also take actual problems that our researchers have actually been facing in their research. The reason or the rationale behind choosing the theme of today's webinar was our researchers in liberal arts are not very much used to carry out quantitative research, partly because our domain normally requires qualitative analysis, and partly because our researchers, in humanities are very much scared of quantifying research data. Given that we have organized this webinar, which will show, the importance of, descriptive statistics, and it will also change our perceptions that quantitative research is only meant for science and engineering field. We shall see today how can we convert qualitative data into quantitative ones and efficiently use statistical approaches to present our findings in a more precise and meaningful manner. And who can enlighten us better on these issues than our own highly learned, one and only Professor S.N. Sridhara. And for his intellectual presence as the chief resource person of this webinar, let us welcome Professor S.N. Sridhara with a huge round of digital applause, please. Professor Sridhara, we are truly privileged to have you with us today, and we are very much thankful to you for your precious time that you have spared with us. And I'm highly optimistic that our students will be benefited from your vast knowledge and experience in research. With these words, now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Supriya to invite Dr. Sridhara to start today's session. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful remarks on important aspects of research. Before we start today's thematic session, this is to announce that all the participants should post their questions in the chat box, and all the questions will be taken during interactive session. Now, I would like to invite Dr. S.N. Sridhara to reflect on the important theme of using descriptive statistics in humanities research. Dr. S.N. Sridhara, Director, MET School of Engineering and Technology, Amity University, Haryana.
Thank you very much, Professor Jha and Dr. Hemant Kumar and Dr. Supriya Sanju for inviting me for this particular event here. And in fact, it is always, as Professor Jha mentioned, the engineers think that, like hypothesis testing, and it is not for engineers, it is for social sciences. And for social sciences people, they say that we don't like mathematics much, and the apprehension for mathematics and statistics is still there. And for me, actually, I was involved in research from a very long time. And of course, this type of research methodology is being delivered by me several times in different states as well. With that, actually, I will take on, and I will just touch upon a small portion of why the descriptive type of research is required. Although I think we already gone through, just because I need to make a foundation for it, and then I will switch over. And then I will switch over later to the actual the theme. Okay, coming to this now, I think my screen is being displayed. Is
Yes,
it okay?
sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Basically, when you look at research design, okay, and when you look at the research design, there are two types of research design we do, basically as an exploratory and conclusive. And when I go to conclusive again, there are two more types of research design: descriptive research design and a casual research design. And again, in the descriptive side, we go by cross-sectional, like single cross-sectional, multiple cross-sectional, and longitudinal, and so on. What exactly is a research design? Research design actually gives a sort of questions and answers for the researcher in the beginning, in which direction I need to go, or in which direction I need to basically design my research questions. That's a major thing. If your research questions are exploratory in nature, that comes under exploratory research, and it is going to be some sort of conclusive in the beginning, and again explore that becomes conclusive. I could have gone longer in between descriptive, casual, and all, but let me go to the next slide itself to say what exactly it is. So what is a exploratory research design? It is a qualitative, flexible approach of investigation wherein the working procedure is defined and explored for various alternate approaches in research. This is a simple procedure and loosely structured. I'll take an example. A rough route map laid down to carry out research towards addressing the issue. And in this procedure, irrespective of the complexities involved, only skeleton of the research design is made. Suppose I say that I would like to explore what is the satisfaction level of an employee in an industry, and basically I really don't know exactly how to go about. I'll say that immediately I will be having something in my mind, maybe stating that, okay, these people are not happy or unhappy. And then I will say, how do I get the data to support my understanding or to improve my understanding? So there are two things here. One is to actually support my understanding, or to improve my statement or improve my understanding. That comes under what is called the exploratory research design. And then conclusive research design is a quantitative definite approach. So when I say definitive approach, basically what happens is I need to make a literature survey, and then I need to go about making it exact, the skeleton, and so after the skeleton we start actually putting everything together. So multiple divisions are shown under the conclusive research design. Like what are the major differences between the two? You can have a look at it. Exploratory research is loosely structured. Conclusive research is well structured and systematic in design. This is highly flexible, so that you can actually, if you're thinking that you're not getting an answer, you can switch over from here to that place. And this has a formal and definitive methodology that must be followed and tested. So therefore, conclusive is more robust, and also it is going to be highly schematic or systematic. The outcomes are specific to the problem defined and cannot be generalized, whereas here, actually, I come out with a hypothesis and outcomes may be generalized since they have a theoretical and practical application. So this comes under conclusive research. Probably with an example, I can take both of them and then start explaining for a researcher when actually we call it as exploratory research and when I'm going to call it as conclusive research. So I think I will take up first an example, and then I will shift over to the next section. The question which I mentioned here, I am interested to know whether the employees in a particular industry or an institute are happy or not. This is a very simple question. I need to conduct a research. Usually what we say when we conduct a research, actually I can use many methods. For example, I can make a questionnaire, go to the people, I mean to the employees, and then try to get the, the reply from them. That is one approach. Another approach, I simply keep going here and there, try to observe from their, the total emotions, and then come out with your understanding. So the methodology is completely now different. Or I can even actually take a feedback or the opinion of the employer rather than going to employee and then try to find out whether these people are happy or not. Or I may even just look at comparing the working conditions of this particular industry or institute compared with other industry or institute and then say, okay, compared to that, this actually is better in so and so. Maybe the salary wise, maybe the attributes, etc., etc. So like that, we have multiple methodology that we can go through. So in exploratory research, it is completely undefined and it is a flexible methodology. Suppose if I go to exploratory research, most of the time I think nowadays what is happening in the media is only flexible methodology and it's exploratory research, not even research. They observe something and immediately they'll take it and they'll think that this is the output of that. And it does not actually involve testing hypothesis at all. I just come to a conclusion as soon as I look at the problem and then try to get some data, immediately I'll come to a conclusion. And that is actually specific and it is, is a problem defined and it cannot be generalized for other industries of similar type, etc. Now come to the conclusion, conclusive research. It is highly well structured. I will define what type of methodology I should go through, maybe one or two or more than that. I will say I will go through the questionnaire sent to the employees, get the data. I will also try to compare this with other institutes or industries. Also, I will get the feedback from the family members of these employees, etc. And this is how I make a methodology to actually, explore more and more. And then I come out with a hypothesis stating that 90% of the employees here are happy. Or let me say 50% of these employees are really happy about their job here, or comfortable, or they are self-sufficient, they are feeling self-sufficient in emotions. This is what we call hypothesis. When I make a hypothesis, it is my statement or my understanding to start with, and afterwards I'll be going ahead to say test the hypothesis and then come out with whether this hypothesis is correct or not, and then you can apply this to in general to a lot more applications. See, for example, I go to an educational institute, there may be a university. I try to find out whether the employees of this particular institute or university are happy. Then I will switch over to other institutes and say, maybe this can be generalized. A similar type of systems, if they are there, probably I can use this there also. This is what it means by, generalization. I think I will take up one by one very quickly. I will not waste much time actually. In a descriptive research method, objectives of the study like why and how, data collection methodology will come, collecting the sample, processing, analyzing the data, report findings, all this will come under descriptive research design. And example for a descriptive one, I'm going one by one. The objectives has to be found out. I have taken one example here. For example, you are interested to find out the usefulness of playing instruments that are installed in a park. You know that many of the public parks are there, and there are some playing instruments for the kids. Somebody is asked actually to find out the usefulness of this playing instruments, whether it is properly received or properly utilized, etc. That is the question. So that is a data objective. What is a data collection method? The moment actually I look at this particular question, initially I will say there are stakeholders for this. The major stakeholders are kids who are actually using this playing instrument. The second stakeholders are the parents who accompany the kids. And therefore, I need to actually get their opinion. What do I do then? I will prepare a questionnaire for users. The users actually include the kids, the parents. Next, I will also make a questionnaire for manufacturer, means manufacturer of this playing instrument. I'll also make a questionnaire for service providers who will actually maintain this particular system. And then so on, I can actually go into multiple way of doing it. One funny thing is there, which actually I would like to mention and also take a deviation from here. This type of questions actually we tried with some of our students in some other institute. we asked them actually to get the data collection by the stakeholders and then come back. And suddenly something actually struck when the student was mentioning, when these people were going to take a reply, take the reply from the kids and the parents who are there, the neighbor actually was, having some sort of murmuring or, shouting at the people and all that. So he mentioned that it seems she is not happy. Immediate question to me was actually, did you actually inquire that why she was unhappy? Maybe she is having some kids, or she is not interested, or she is having some sort of disturbance over here because of this kids playing or making sounds, etc. and so on. It could be a nuisance for them. So immediately one more questionnaire was made only for the neighbors, and we went through the neighbors, and it gave a very, very interesting phenomena as a result of, which states that many of these playing instruments make creaking noises. Maybe the people are trying to make a isa paisa or some cycling, etc. and so on. So these were making a lot of sounds, and that creaking sound was really annoying for the neighbors. And then we actually expanded the usefulness of the playing instrument by taking the other people inside. So what I mean to say is very clearly, data collection method or the data collection sources are very important for the research. You should not actually focus on only one of the segment of that particular the questions are considered. You look at the overall thing, what we call 360-degree type of thing, then only the research will be complete, which is very, very important. Now selecting the sample, like we actually ask the students to go to small park, big park, park with the rich people living area, number of sample, etc. and so on. Then collecting the data. What are the different ways of collecting data? You cannot ask the kids to fill a Google form. So sometimes there will be a sort of personal meeting. A few of them you have to send email, maybe the manufacturer, service provider, you will not be able to reach them. And through others as well, maybe you can ask some people that you please get me this data, he is your neighbor, etc. and so on. Now comes actually is the processing and analyzing the data. See, there are actually, these are to be conducted, in a cycle. What I mean to say, when I come to processing and analyzing data in terms of statistical and probabilistical approaches, and then use a hypothesis, many a time a new result will come or a new indication will come where I need to go back to the questionnaire again. Means I may have to add up a question to find out some interesting thing. See, for example, let me say, in a statistical approach, I try to find out and say that nearly about 60% of the boy kids, the male kids, are happy with this particular, playing instruments, and the other person, the gender is really not very happy. Suddenly something comes into your mind, what may be the reason? What type of things are there? And immediately I'll go back to the questionnaire, and I may add up a question in one more question to that particular one, like which type of toy or which type of the playing instrument is more interesting, or it is more liked by you, etc. and so on. So like that, we try to make like one loop from processing, analyzing data back to the question collection method to complete the research in overall way. It should be holistic. It cannot be actually, I did only this much and then come out of that. I'll tell you one thing. When I was doing my undergraduation B at mechanical engineering in BMS College of Engineering, Bangalore, Indian Institute of Management came out with a survey data, and they asked a few of our people who are volunteered to go for actually finding out a survey on the fodder in the villages. For a fodder, most of the time they were using only the cut tree or etc. and so on. So there was a questionnaire which was set across. So we were actually given training how to go and approach the people, how we should talk to them, in what way actually we should win their heart to get your data, etc. and then note down and everything. At that time, everything is a paper and pencil. So we noted down, we came back, and there was a spot analysis, and the professors in IIM called us back, 20 of us. And the professor told me that there is some interesting statistics. I would like to change the question, or I need to add some more questions. So those questions were added and given back to us. And at that time, I think probably I didn't understand why they are sending us once again. And now I realize it later once we start doing research. These are the questions which are raising when you are trying to analyze something. And that analysis will go back and make you to have some questions again. And then we come to proper conclusion and applying for the larger mass on that. Okay. What is a survey? I think probably you have gone through. Quickly, I'll go through because it is required for my statistics later. So a survey is a systematic method of gathering information from a sample of entities for the purpose of constructing quantitative descriptors. I'll take the example of the previous one where I am actually going for picking up a sample of the kids. Suppose I say I actually watch or I go to the park every day for a month, and then I will see on an average about 50 to 100 kids are using this particular instrument. Now I cannot actually ask each and every kid every day. So therefore, I will choose a sample based on some statistics again. Sometimes it is random, sometimes alternate person, sometimes alternate two persons, etc. and so on. So there are actually methodology how we can make a survey. So what is the meaning of it? A survey is a systematic method of gathering information from a sample of entities for the purpose of constructing quantitative descriptors. So when I make a survey, I am looking for some quantitative descriptors. This is very important, as Professor Zha mentioned. For any humanity resources or research, you have to actually boil down with a quantitative descriptor. What is the data collection? It refers to the systematic development of procedure and system for collecting the required data from a sample. It's a part of small survey. So the data collection is a part of survey where survey actually goes with the collections. I mean, knowing the information or collecting the information. But after collecting that information, when you process it, it becomes data. Okay. Now the design of questionnaire that actually leads to identifying a sample and getting the response for the questionnaire. What is the next step? Then the next step is redesign of questionnaire if required. This is what I was telling earlier, that once you make a questionnaire, you should never stop. You can actually go for redesign of questionnaire if required, and then statistical processing of the data collected. And look, there is one more thing. Once I make a redesign, I'm asking again to go for design of questionnaire and then go back to this again. And then statistical processing of data is to be done. This is where I'm going to make most of my time today. So this is why I'm just showing you that what are the procedures we are going, and then we come to inference and generalizing results. Now the three processes which I said here: design, identifying a sample, and gather the information. Based on the information, redesign if required. And once you find that it is completely redefined, you can actually go to actually what is called statistical processing of the data collected. And then once you process that, you will come to inference and generalizing the results. Now, there is another question which I'm going to take up here. For example, for the data collection, identifying the influence of co-curricular activities on the performance of children in the age limit of 5 to 12 years in the academy. I think these types of surveys and research have been long time being done, and it is eternal. Recently, I think all of you know that the new education policy NEP 2020 is defined, which actually is focused more on expanding the horizon for the students or the kids, so that they are not completely lost in only curricular activities, but a lot of co-curricular activities. Why these types of things are coming? Maybe it's a result of these types of research which have been done before even coming to the conclusion. The question here is identifying the influence of co-curricular activities on the performance of children in the age limit of 5 to 12 in their academics. This may be my research problem. How do I go about it? First of all, I make a questionnaire. What are the questionnaires for whom actually I make? Who are the stakeholders? For the school teachers I will make, for the parents I will make, for the children I make. I understand that these are the main stakeholders. But basically, I need not actually limit to this. If somebody is thinking that what could be the next stakeholder, maybe a few of you can just type it immediately. I'll come back here and then try to add it up, because I need to make you also a little more thing. Probably you can put it in your chat box, telling that who are the other stakeholders whom I should be interviewing, or from whom I should get the data. The question is, I'll go back to the question so that you will understand what the question is. The problem is, what is the influence of co-curricular activities on the performance of children in the age limit of 5 to 12 years in their academic? Okay. Now I just chose only three stakeholders here, for the school teacher, for the parents, and for the children. But I'm asking you, who could be else? Before going to the next slide, I will read the next sentence, and then I will ask Supriya Sanju ma'am actually to read out if you have written something, so that it will be highly interactive. Now, what I reading the next sentence is, questionnaire must be designed to cover all the aspects of the topic and must be able to get the useful information from the identified samples. So, whatever I am thinking that whatever is my perceptions are there or perceive these perceptions, those perceptions should actually shall be converted into questions. And that is what we are going to make a questionnaire for school teacher, questionnaire for parents, and questionnaire for children. May I ask Supriya Sanju to just read out loudly if there are some comments in the chat box, which it's not visible for me. Who are the other people, the stakeholders for whom actually we can collect, go and collect the data? Can you just read out somebody?
No question. Chat box.
I think I require all the participants to please participate. My question is very simple. I'm actually going to take up 3 stakeholders: school teacher, parents, and children. Apart from this, to know that how the co-curricular activity is influencing or high influential, etc., you need to actually write something in the chat box or the questionnaire box, please, so that I can actually take it a little further. Let it be more interactive, so that you learn a lot. Any comments came? Okay, there is a question actually, specialist from child psychology. That is the thing. Anything? Chart is disabled. Okay, you can put it in the questionnaire session, no problem. Please put it in the questionnaire session. Please put it in the questionnaire session. Probably we can take it from the questionnaire session only.
Mr. Rahul, can you, activate chat so that people could chat?
If not possible, they can go to the questionnaire session because I can read the questions here.
Okay. Okay.
Both the way it is okay. The society, yeah. Somebody said that the society, yes. Yes, the child psychologist should also be, asked. Now, these are the things which probably we may ignore in the beginning. And these are some types of inputs which actually we are getting. The society definitely is going to be one part. Actually, we should ask the society. We should also ask actually the child psychologist to find out that really how it is influenced, etc., and so on, because already that type of study would have been done. Okay, now coming to the questionnaire preparation, questionnaire must be different for different target groups, as you know. There could be repeated questions among different target groups depending on the requirement, and every expected relation between the targeted outcome must be represented in the questionnaire. If there are some serious people who are, really looking for some research in humanity sciences, probably even after your workshop is over, I can actually respond to you. If you can just prepare a questionnaire for kids, for school teachers, and for parents separately, and you can actually post it also. Probably, I think also I will give you some more information on, or some more my opinion on these particular one, how exactly you can define a questionnaire. This questionnaire is maybe different, but maybe some repeated questions, and every expected relation between the targeted outcome must be represented in the questionnaire. This is very, very important. That means you need to have a lot of what you call, the pre-idea, like what are the things that can go into it. Based on that, you should be asking the question. Okay. Now, next, data reduction and analysis. There is some called data processing to eliminate the obscure data. There will be a lot of obscure data sometime, and you have to take it out. Sometimes we call it as noise. It's called noise reduction many a time. Just a minute. Sometimes it is called the noise reduction. Just 1 minute. Sorry. So the noise reduction is called actually obscure data shall be removed. And then the data processing to prepare it for data analysis, and data analysis by statistical and probability tools. Today I'm going to take up more on the statistical and probability tool. There could be curve fitting, there are Fourier transforms, etc., and so on. Now this curve fitting, partly I think humanity people will use it. The Fourier transform, other transform processing tools will not be much applicable for humanity science people. So maybe you can actually look at curve fitting little later, which actually you would have also covered in your thing. I'll be covering today on statistical and probability tools. Let me take the same example here. Let me say that I have collected some data from kids, basically, to start with. So the data processing to obscure, there could be some obscure data. What do you mean by obscure data? Some of these people would have answered for all the questions like yes, 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 no, 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 and all that. You can look at the pattern and then try to say, okay, this particular kid is in no way actually be useful for us in terms of the data. So you can just remove it. Similarly, when I make a data processing, I find out that a particular data comes at a pitch, which actually I will take up when I take up statistical and probability tools. Once it comes as a spike, that spike can be removed. This is what we call obscure data is removed. Now, data processing to prepare it for data analysis means cleaning the data and then collecting all the data. Nowadays, I think you have all the Excel sheet, Google form, etc. So you can collect all of them in the Google form. In fact, the Google form at the end, it gives you a lot of statistics. Probably you're already doing it anyway. And these statistics actually will give you how exactly this is going. Okay, and then we come to what is called statistics and probability tool. And the statistical probability tool is a major thing which we'll be using in our humanities science. Now I take up a hypothesis. So what is a hypothesis? It is a claim that we want to test. Please remember, it is a claim that we want to test. Means whatever I understand or I perceive opinion about an outcome of a particular research that we want to test. In a population, the trend of data is hypothesized, and this hypothesis is to be verified using statistics. This is what we call as a hypothesis. So what we do, we actually take a hypothesis, a statement. Based on the statement, then I need to either prove or disprove it. I'll go back to the problem which I was mentioning earlier. What was the problem we took actually? The problem we took was identifying the influence of co-curricular activities on the performance of children in the age limit of 5 to 12 years in their academy. Immediately what comes into my mind, or few of us mind, that if you have co-curricular activity for the children, maybe their curricular activity will be nourished because both sides of the brain is going to be developed. This is one type of hypothesis which I am going to think. That means the influence of co-curricular activity on the performance of children in academics is going to be positive. Means it is good. This is one hypothesis. Let me take the other hypothesis. Somebody may think the moment actually I allow my kid for co-curricular activity, he loses concentration in the academics. That means it is going to be negative. I think now we are understanding how the hypothesis is going to be made now. The first hypothesis which I mentioned here as one of the researcher, I may take it positive that co-curricular activity is positive for the performance of children in academics. The other person, researcher, may take a question or make a different stand. He said that co-curricular activity is going to spoil the academics of the children. Now, this is where actually I'm coming here to take up this particular one. In a population, the trend of data is hypothesized, and this hypothesis is to be verified using statistics. So I took a hypothesis stating that the co-curricular activities is going to improve or aid the academics of the kid. Now this is the hypothesized statement. Now how do I verify it? I need statistics. Without that I cannot say that. This is my perception to start with. To check that I do statistics. Now how do we actually put them in a proper statement? A null hypothesis usually written as H suffix O or H null, H0, HO, it is actually meant, pronounced as HO, is currently accepted value for a parameter. Please don't, move away from this. What is this parameter? What is currently accepted value, etc. In my example, which I was giving, the hypothesis which I said, curricular activity is going to help the kid is H0. That is my null hypothesis. Means the established hypothesis according to me, or the first hypothesis according to me, is H0. Why it is called null hypothesis, I will tell you later. Null doesn't mean that it is negative basically. Null means the first hypothesis which I am going to take up. Okay, means it is neutral. Null here actually says neutral. Thinking that the researcher is neutral in the beginning and is thinking simply that, the students, the co-curricular activities is going to help the students in their academics. What is the alternate hypothesis? This is a challenging in the null hypothesis, and that is verifying the claim of null hypothesis. You know what I mean? I said that curricular activity is going to help the academics of the kids, but null hypothesis says no, it's going to spoil. So it is a negative of null hypothesis. It's called alternate hypothesis. What we usually do in the humanity research is we define a null hypothesis. and then test the null hypothesis whether it is true or false. Automatically, alternate hypothesis will come out. Let me repeat again. In humanity, you need to come out with a hypothesis and test hypothesis using statistics, and then find out whether this hypothesis is true or false. The moment actually you disprove the null hypothesis, then you will accept the alternate hypothesis. The moment actually you say that null hypothesis is correct, you accept the same hypothesis as the final result. So this is as simple as that. You may be wondering then, for a research of, let me say, a PhD level, how many hypotheses I can have? Or is it only single hypothesis I should have for a humanity research activity at a PhD level? Of course, there could be only one if you are framing it in a proper way, or it could be actually broken into 2, 3 of them. Okay, see, for example, I said here, co-curricular activity is going to help the students in academics is a single statement. What I will actually, break them into a few more hypotheses, which are null hypotheses again, I may something like that. A controlled access to co-curricular activity will help the student. I think now you understand. Initially, I said co-curricular activity is going to help the academics of the students. Now I'll say a controlled access to co-curricular activity will come under, as a positive thing. Or I will say a co-curricular activity at present so and so will help them. So something like that, I can actually make more hypotheses based on that. Let me give an answer for my question which I asked. How many hypotheses you can have for a research at humanity sciences? Basically, can you have only one null hypothesis? No, you can have multiple null hypotheses. But basically, for the entire thing, you will have one hypothesis which could be broken into many hypotheses. Okay, now I come to one more summary again. I started with the research question. This research question I made, looked at the sample. I made a data survey. After the data survey, I'm asking a question myself that whether my statement on a particular starting point is correct or not, which is called null hypothesis. If I prove it statistically, it is accepted. If I disprove it, the alternate hypothesis is going to be accepted. Okay. I think everybody is clear about it. I take an example here to state that how exactly the hypotheses are written. Look here, a machine is used for producing precision components to accuracy of 0.01 mm. After continuous usage of machine, the operator say that the machine is no longer producing components with accuracy of 0.01 mm. Then hypothesis, how do we write the hypothesis? Please do not get scared away. I was telling something completely on the humanity science. Suddenly I came to something little engineering. But I'll tell you why this is required to make a particular statement. But this is a very common statement. I'm having a machine here and I'm producing some component. A component may be a small shaft or whatever it is. And the accuracy with which actually I'm producing machine in repeated way is 0.01 mm. After continuous usage of machine, the operator will feel that the machine is no longer producing components with accuracy of 0.01 mm. Then how the hypothesis will be written is our question. Look here, null hypothesis. H0 is H0. Actually, I should have written mu is equal to 0.01. Initially, I have not written mu here because I didn't want to bring the statistics here. I would say H0 is actually null hypothesis. The machine produces components with accuracy of 0.01 mm. But I suggest you please read this as H0 colon mu is equal to 0.01, which I'll be giving you a little later. The mu is actually mean value. The mean value of this accuracy is 0.01 mm. This is null hypothesis. So machine produces components with accuracy 0.01. What will be the alternate hypothesis then? The alternate hypothesis says it is not equal to 0.01. Means the machine does not produce components with accuracy of 0.01. So what I mean to say by 0.01 mm, if it actually slightly varies from here and there plus or minus, I will actually go by alternate hypothesis. Otherwise, I'll accept null hypothesis. Now the question to you may be, is it really possible for a machine to produce exactly 0.01 mm accuracy component? No, it is not possible, right? Then what we say, we come with what is called a barrier or a margin. And then I say 0.01 mm plus or minus 1%. That is a dimension which I'm going to look at. Or maybe plus or minus 5%, etc. and so on. Okay, now coming to this particular statement, I wrote a null hypothesis H0 and HA. Both of them should be taken with mu value. Mu is actually called, the mean. Actually, now you see this, what I'm writing here. Null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis are mathematically opposite to each other. Null hypothesis says H0 colon mu is equal to 0.01 mm. H0 referent null hypothesis, mu is the mean of that particular sample or the entire population, which is 0.01 mm. Alternate hypothesis says it is not so. Possible outcomes of the test is then either you reject null hypothesis or fail to reject null hypothesis. I think you understand now what is the meaning of it. The null hypothesis is usually written either to reject or to accept, but in most of the cases, it is actually meant for rejecting. Means if I make a conclusion in the beginning, you may reject it. And that comes under reject null hypothesis so that you can accept alternate hypothesis. Or you fail to reject, means statistically you show that I cannot fail this statement. So then at least becomes fail to reject null hypothesis. I think people are getting slowly heated up for a particular statement. Okay, now let me take up one more thing. How do we hypothesize in practice? It's the same thing. Suppose I take a sample of 100. This can be a random sample. Suppose I say the machine is making 1000 components. I take randomly about 100 of them. So when I take 100 of them and then test the accuracy of these by measuring them personally, because I cannot test all the 1000 components to come to conclusion, randomly I've chosen only 100 of them. And maybe one day the average accuracy is found to be plus or minus 0.01 plus or minus 5%. The other one is 15%. Another day it may be giving 25%. Now there are three conditions which I just found out. The variations in each day, I'm changing something like this. I'm finding it goes by 5%, 15%, or 25%. Then what is the meaning of it? Now the question is, in which case the null hypothesis can be accepted, or in which case the null hypothesis can be rejected. This is the question which we usually ask for any of our humanity sciences type of things. Okay. Maybe I'll take one more thing. How do we test the hypothesis in practice? The statistical tools help in taking the decision on accepting or rejecting null hypothesis. See, for example, I have some numbers here. If I can actually play with these numbers, or crunch these numbers, or process these numbers, maybe I will get an answer for the question which I asked here. The question I asked is whether I should take the null hypothesis that it is, on an average it is making 0.01 mm, or it is completely deviated from 0. So that means I need to operate something with these numbers, and that is what we call data crunching, or the statistical processing. Okay, and then the statistical treatment will give a number based on which the decision is taken to either reject or to accept. Okay. Now there are a few definitions which I am coming through. This is very important for all of you to please make a note of it very clearly. Level of confidence. There is a statement called level of confidence. What do you mean by level of confidence? It indicates how confident we are in accepting or rejecting thesis, hypothesis, like 90%, 95%, etc. The symbol used is C. Okay. There is another one, and that is called basically level of significance is alpha, which is referred as 1 minus level of confidence. And this is actually the 1 minus of that value. So therefore, if it is 90%, this is going to be 10% or 0.1. Okay, and if this is 95%, that LOC is 95% called 0.95, alpha is going to be 0.05, right? So examples I have given here, a few examples as you can see from here. So the examples are, if LOC is 99%, that is C is taken as 0.99. Alpha is a level of significance is 1 minus 0.99 is 0.01. I'll go back again to make it understandable physically. What do you mean by this? I had that machine problem, and I said that, okay, this particular machine actually is producing 0.01 mm accuracy. And now I will ask a question. The question may be something like this. What is the percentage, or what is the probability of getting any sample which will be lying between 0.01 mm and plus or minus 5%? I will say, okay, by 90% I can say it will be like that. That is what I call by level of confidence. Now there are, you may ask me a question, how did you come to that conclusion? Of course, there are many methods in statistics how actually you can conclude. It also depends on your experience, but there are statistical methods in which actually you can also choose these numbers. At present, I will give you some numbers which usually goes like 90, 95, 98, 99. These are the usual significance levels or the confidence levels which are taken in most of the statistics. But there are ways actually you can derive it out. Maybe in some other opportunity, if I try to meet you, we can also think more on that, how actually these numbers are derived. Now the level of significance is defined as 1 minus 0.99, which comes to 0.01. So I was actually thinking about, talking about level of confidence and also the level of significance. These two are required basically for making a statistical analysis. I'm making it as simple as possible. Maybe at the end you will understand that how simple it is for any one of us actually to make a test based on these. Okay. Now writing a hypothesis, I have taken another example here, similar example. A machine produces roller ball of 6 mm and the employee opines, means he actually has an opinion that the machine is no longer producing the roller balls of 6 mm dia as a mean. The testing will be done by taking a random sample of 1000 balls with a confidence level of 98%. Write the hypothesis, test. Okay. Now, how do we write that? First of all, what is the mean value of the roller ball? Actually, is a 6 mm is a mean value which we considered here as 6 mm. Null hypothesis stating that the mean size of the roller balls made of the machine is 6 mm and therefore I have written simply 6 mm. What is a null hypothesis then? Null hypothesis says it is not equal to 6 mm. The alternate hypothesis. So the alternate hypothesis stating that mean size of the roller balls made by the machine is no longer equal to 6 mm. It could be more or less. That is the meaning of these two statements. So I wrote a statement coming from a problem very similar to the problem which I make. All of you please start thinking how you can actually get a problem of similar type. Most of the humanities sciences can be boiled down to a problem very similar to that, or you need to bring it to this level to make this formation. I'm not telling that this is the only method. If you have a hypothesis or if you want to make a hypothesis, this is the method which you can do. Okay. Now, the testing will be done by taking a random sample of 1000 balls with a confidence level of 98%, and then it will go something like this. As number of samples is 1000, level of confidence is 0.98 because level of confidence is given as 98%, and level of significance is going to be 0.02. That is H0 mu is equal to H0 of mu is equal to 6 mm is the null hypothesis. H1 of mu not equal to 6 mm is the alternate hypothesis. What is left with us then? The left out thing with us is basically either to disprove or prove the null hypothesis. If you disprove null hypothesis, I will be falling into this. And if I prove it, I will be falling into the same one. Still, people may be thinking that what is this? We are going through a lot of machines and all. I'll be giving another example. The parents show the satisfaction index about the teaching in a school by not more than 70%. Now look here, the question actually is written not more than 70%. You know what is the meaning of it? Any faculty or any parent will not have a satisfaction which is more than 70%. Nobody will say more than 70%. They may say anything starting from 0 to 70%. I think now we are understanding we are on the lower side of it. A new teacher believes that satisfaction index may be more than 70%. This is a new thing which is coming through. A test is then planned to test this statement by taking feedback from 50 parents chosen in a random of a class of 100 students, and the level of significance is set at 0.01. So there are a lot of numbers here. Let us try to understand. How do we write the hypothesis for it? Initially, what is defined is mu is equal to 70% and less than 75. It's not equal to 70%. It is less than or equal to 70%. Okay. A new teacher says it is more than 70%. Okay. Now then you can see that here I didn't write mu here. I wrote p here because it is a proportion. The difference between the previous example and this example. In a previous example, it was a mean value. It is a number. This is percentage. So I said proportion is less than or equal to 0.7 is the null hypothesis. And then the opposite of that is alternate hypothesis. Okay. Before even writing the coefficient of, say level of significance, I'll go back again to show the difference between the two. Look here, in the previous one, I said null hypothesis is equal to mu is equal to 6 mm and alternate hypothesis mu is equal to not equal to 6 mm. Okay. And now I wrote something like H naught P is less than or equal to null hypothesis, I mean 0.7, less than or equal to 0.7 or greater than 0.7. It's an alternate hypothesis. So the difference here is P. There it is mu, it is P. Mu is written when I have a number. P is written whenever you have percentage or proportions. Okay. Now what about the other statement here? I am taking 50 people or random class of 100. This is a random number. Level of significance is set at 0.01. The meaning of that, the parameter mu represents, this is actually I told earlier. Now n is the number of samples, that is small n equals 50. And alpha, level of significance is 0.01. And C is the level of confidence is 0.98. I think you know how you got it. C and alpha are connected by 1 minus the other value, right? 1 minus the other value will always give the 1. Earlier we were giving level of confidence. If I say level of confidence is 98%, then I write C is equal to 0.98. Then level of significance would have become 0.02. Sorry, I made a mistake here. If it is 0.01, it should have been 0.99. I'll just correct it now. Just a minute, I'll correct it out. 0.99. Okay. So I made it as 0.0, one minus the other, so it becomes 0.99. And then now I will be taking up the distributions actually. What I'll just switch over immediately. I just wrote, these are the statements. How to write the statement I noted down. Now I'll be taking something called normal distribution. And why this normal distribution is taken here? Because before even going to the analysis of the statistics, we should understand what do you mean by normal distribution and so on. Normal probability distribution is very widely applied in most of the statistics and probability. And it is symmetric about y-axis. I think I should show you some picture and then I should come back. Please look at this picture first. Don't worry about the numbers. I will tell you what is the meaning of this. The picture actually shows some curve, a bell curve, which is actually not touching x-axis anywhere on either end, left hand or right hand, but is having a peak here and it is symmetry in shape. There is something in x-axis, there is something in the y-axis. Okay, there is something in the x-axis, there is something in the y-axis. I will just take an example here how we construct a normal curve in any number of occurrences. Suppose I take in an average the percentage of students getting like 50%, 60%, etc. and so on. I want to see how many people are there in that. First I say, suppose I say the x-axis here, this is the 50% marks. The last one is maybe 90% marks or more than 90% marks, etc. Now, if I look about 100 people in a class, and if I am going to have, let me say, maximum number of people are around 50%, I get this number. Then I get some people which are scoring highly, slightly higher than 50%, that number will come here. I'm just drawing a curve there. I think you are understanding. Now, suppose I take the students who are scoring, let me say, 60%. This may be 60%. I will see less number of people here. Then I will take 70%, less number of people. I will take 80%, less number of people, and so on. And similarly, on the other hand, less than 50%, I take 40%, the number of students is less. And again, I'll take 30%, number of students is lesser than the 50% one, and so on. So this is what we call a normal curve. How actually is reliable is a normal curve, or what are the different shapes? I will tell you, normal curve need not be always be like this. There are many other kurtosis and other things, but when I say normal, it is going to have a symmetry on either end. And this is called a normal curve. Okay, I'll go back to the probability, the understanding of that. It is symmetric about y-axis. Y-axis represents the probability number of the occurrences of an incidence, which I told you earlier. X-axis represents the single variable that is under variation or observation. Example, suppose you are counting the number of steel balls manufactured by a machine whose mean is 5 mm, and then the central value is actually 5 mm. Central value is then going to be 5 mm. That means if you say 5 mm here, mu is going to be 5 here. That's the meaning of that. Okay. There are some other numbers which I'm going to take up a little later. but I'll try to explain you what is the meaning of it. Normal distribution is completely defined by mean value called mu and standard deviation sigma. If I have only these two numbers, the entire curve can be drawn. I think you already know what you mean by standard deviation. There was an equation for standard deviation for a given set of data. Mu, you know, it's an arithmetic mean. Automatically, you can just add it up and then take an average. And then the flatness of the curve varies from one distribution to the other. The total area under the curve is going to be always 1. These are the major characteristics of a normal curve. Whenever I take the area of the entire curve area is going to be always number 1, means a single value. The mean, mode, and median all lie in the same spot, that is the center of the distribution, and standard deviation measures the distance from the, okay, this I'll try to explain here. Now you look here, whatever the characteristics, one is it exactly goes with the left-hand side and right-hand side equal, number 1. Number 2, I said that this y-axis is the probability of occurrences or the number of occurrences. This is actually the variable which I am observing. In the previous case, I said the student having 50%, number of students scoring 50%, there's a 60% number of students scoring 60%, and so on. Now let me come to what do you mean by sigma. When I take sigma here, there is something called mu plus 1 sigma. This is called mu minus 1 sigma. And now this length will be mu plus 2 sigma. And this actually is called mu minus 2 sigma. 2 sigma. So if you see that I have written only minus 1 sigma, minus 2 sigma, minus 3 sigma, what it means is basically mu plus 1 sigma, mu minus 2 sigma, and mu minus 3 sigma. If I look at some number here, the width from minus 3 sigma to plus 3 sigma, in this, something is written as basically 99.7%. It means that if I take 3 sigma here and 3 sigma value here on a number of occurrence, the total area which I'm going to cover is 99.7%, or the total probability is around 99.9%. And then if that is the case, if I take 1 sigma and 1 sigma, what is the value of area under that? Value of area under that is 34.13% plus 34.13%. So it is around 68.26%. So it means 68.3% will be there between minus 1 sigma and plus 1 sigma. And if I take 2 sigmas again, it comes to 95.5%. If I take 3 sigma under minus 3 sigma and minus plus 3 sigma, it is around 99.76%. Why should I know this? When I take up an equation, we will come to know what is called finding the area under the normal curve, and that area will tell us what is the percentage of confidence with which I can say a particular occurrences happen. Okay. Now I will take up the second one. And when are these numbers are coming? I'll go back to that. What it says is these sigmas, how do we actually signify that? If you look at a curve, the curve which is drawn something like this, slightly changes its shape from here to here. And the point at which it changes the shape mathematically is the point where the sigma comes into. This mathematically is shown also and proven also. Similarly, there is one more change in the slope of the curve or the shape of the curve, then it becomes 2 sigma. From here to here, the shape of the curve is same. Now from here to here, it changes again. That is called 3 sigma. People may ask, what do you mean by 6 sigma? That's a question I'm going to ask you later. So now every time you find there is a variation in this particular curve, those points are basically called point of inflection, and these point of inflection will give you change in sigma value. Okay. Now that is what I've written at the end. Standard deviation measures the distance from the mean to the point of inflection, the point where the curve changes the upside down bowl shape to a right side up bowl. That is called basically standard deviation, and there are equations for calculating standard deviation if you have some numbers. Okay. Now, probabilities follow an empirical rule. Firstly, about 68% of the total number of values lie within one standard deviation of the mean. In addition, 95% of values lie in the 2 standard deviations of the mean. Lastly, about 99.7% of the lie within the 3 standard deviations of the mean. That's what you found from this. So within 1%, you get 68.3%. Within 2 sigmas, you get 95.5%, and within 3 sigma, you will be getting 99.7%. Right? The total population. Okay. Next one. The formula for the normal distribution is given by like this. Please understand, don't think that this is some mathematics which is impossible to understand. I will tell you the function is nothing but the curve value. You can call it as y value. How do I find the y value of each curve on y or each point on the y is given by 1 over root 2 pi. Please don't ask me that how did I get this equation, but this equation is for the normal curve. Pi value, you know that it is 22 by 7 and it's going to be 3.17, etc. Exponential of x minus mu by 2 sigma squared. I will tell you what is the meaning of this. X is any number taken in a sample. Mu is the mean of that particular population, which I just understood. And sigma is the standard deviation. I'll repeat. Sigma is the standard deviation of the entire population. There is something called population. Total population, what is it sigma? Means standard deviation is sigma. Now mu actually is the mean of the whole population. Mu is the mean of the whole population. X is any number, usually it is called mean of sample. X is mean of sample. I'll repeat, out of this sample, I'll take this much sample. Suppose I say 1000 are there, 1000 is a mean population. Out of 1000, mu is going to be my mean of population. When I take X, I'll take 100. In 100, I will take another mean that is called X. I think all of you now understood. Now look here, this entire thing is a number. Pi is a number, 2 is a number, exponential of something is a number, and therefore X is a number, mu is a number, sigma is a number. This is going to give me a number. You know what is the meaning of that? For different types of mu values and sigma value, I'm going to get a different curve value. Let me repeat again. If I give you mu and sigma for a population means entire population, I'm going to get a curve. This curve may be sharp, or it may be slightly flat, or even very, very flat. That depends on your mu and sigma. I'll go back to the curve here to say that once again, what do you mean by that? Look here, if my sigma is a large number, 3 sigma becomes this much large, very, very large. And when it becomes very, very large, this curve on the flat will flatten up. It will flatten down. And similarly, if the sigma is smaller, it's going to become very, very small. Now, what is the meaning of it? In a class, if the students are scoring completely around 50%, it becomes completely a vertical one. If there is a wide spread of band, the students are scoring 30%, 40%, 10%, 20%, etc. Similarly, 90%, 80%, and so on, the curve becomes something like this. So standard deviation goes across. So I think another way actually is the standard deviation. If you can now understand, if the standard deviation is larger and larger, it means that the spread is more. If the standard deviation is lesser and lesser, the spread is less. So therefore, the curve area also keeps changing. I think you are very clear about this number. And again, I want to say, if I want to draw this curve, you understand that this is y or f value or f of x. It depends on only two numbers. One number is a mu, another number is sigma of population. Substitute there in any Excel sheet, automatically you will get this curve. Just substitute mu and sigma, you will get this value. This is why we said normal distribution can be completely plotted with the values of mean mu and standard deviation sigma, if it is known to us. Okay. Good. Now let's try to look at this particular one. This is a normal curve. I have drawn 3 lines here. Let me see what all these 3 lines represent. I take an example here. Let the mean dia of the steel ball produced by a machine is 5 mm. So the mean diameter, or the mu, is equal to 5 will come to the center. So what I mean that is very simple. I have taken a population, and in that population, I understand in the entire population, the mean size of the steel ball manufactured by this machine is 5 mm. That comes to the center. Now less than 5 mm goes to the left, right side actually goes as more than 5 mm. The question is, what is the probability of choosing a steel ball from a sample that the chosen ball is having a dia less than 4.8 mm? I'll repeat again. I choose out of 1000 balls, maybe I will choose 100 balls. Now it becomes a sample. Out of this sample, I will choose one particular ball, and what is the percentage of the probability that this will be less than 4.8 mm? That means, I will tell you, this problem is translated into a graphics, something like if I find the area to the left side of this particular 4.8, the answer I can get here. I'll repeat again. 4.8 mm is the observation which people are asking, that what is the probability of choosing a steel ball from the sample that the chosen ball is having a dia less than 4.8 mm. Less than 4.8 mm means if I find the area under this curve, I got the probability. Now I think you are getting an idea how I can actually use if I have some data of a normal curve. If you have a normal curve, which is a standard normal curve, which is actually taken equivalent to base 1, then you just use those values and then find out the area. Find the area, that gives you the probability. It's as simple as that. The area under the curve, normal curve to the left of the vertical line marked as 4.8 is P of x comma 4.8 is the probability of the random variable x to be less than 4.8. Now I'll ask a second question. And similarly, if I ask another question, what is the probability of a ball which will be actually, lying beyond 5.2? Means I pick up a ball, what is the percentage or the probability that the ball will be more than 5.2 mm dia? Okay, that is how I'm going to write area, to the right of this 5.2. Area to the right of 5.2. I think now you should be understanding. Suppose I want the area between these two, what does it represent? Anybody can just start, thinking yourself what this area between this 4.8 and 5.2 will represent now. Okay, first of all, let me say, what does the area represent? Area represents probability, number one. First one is probability, number one. Number two, if I say there are two numbers within which I need to find out what is the probability, it means that what is the probability that I choose a ball in a sample that it lies between 4.8 and 5.2. So if I find this area, automatically it will say that is a probability. And this probability is linked to my confidence level or the level of significance, etc. and so on. I take up a problem and then I show how exactly it can be done. And where do I get this number? You have standard normal tables. Okay. Now I'll be going through this particular normal distribution. I told you earlier, a normal distribution can be actually, it can be actually having a very sharp edged one, centered, or it could be actually what you call completely spread across. So it becomes flat or it becomes kurtosis. What do? We try to normalize. You give me any sample, I'm going to normalize to a particular shape or a particular, appearance. That normal distribution is usually written something like this. For any normal distribution, usually you get n of mu and sigma. But when I take a standard normal distribution, the mu value will be taken as 0. Means the mu value, the central mean value will be taken as 0. Then I call it a standard normal deviation, which will be then given by mu is equal to 0 or sigma is equal to 1, which will be given by z is equal to x minus mu by sigma. Please remember, this is a very, very popular equation. Whenever you want to use the normal table, you need to know only these numbers. The mu is going to be 0 there, and therefore I'm going to take up a very normal distribution. If I want to find z for any other mu, I'm going to take this mu here, substitute, put the value of sigma, and therefore if I know the value of x, that is a mean of the sample, I will get the z value. Okay, what is the meaning of that? I will take up little later. Physical meaning, but I'll tell you one by one again. Mu is the mean of the whole, population, whole population. Sigma is of standard deviation of the whole population. X is the mean of the sample, a part of that. Z is the normal value or the normal distribution value. Okay, this is called the Z core, is a number of standard deviations from the mean. The table shows the negative and positive Z values in any normal curve, and area shaded to the left of the reference line, indicating that the area below the reference line is considered. These are the things which you should be understanding. Okay, now I'll show you the table here. I don't know whether the table is visible. It looks very, very small here. What I will do is I will just escape. I will try to magnify this. I'm trying to increase the size of this. Okay, now you can see here. Okay, now you just see this is the normal curve. Sir, this is visible. Is it okay? It says. Okay. Now this is the normal curve. I have a Z value here, which actually I measured or calculated that. less than Z is the area under that. So you get a negative table, Z value equals minus 3.6 and its second digit. Suppose you get any Z value minus 3.65. Okay. What do you do that? Or how do we actually take it a value? These second digits you should consider here. So if I take minus 3.605 or 65, I will take minus 3.6 with 0.5 added up 3.65. So this is the number. Suppose I get a number minus 3.54. Minus 3.54 means minus 3.5 here, 0.04 here. Those two combination together is 0.002. So this is the Z value which I'm going to take up. Okay. Let me repeat again. If your Z value is going to be minus 3.5 with 0.05, those combinations has to be taken. Okay. Now this is for Z value of -1. Similarly, you will also have Z value for the positive one. So I will show you this positive one here. Now this is for the positive curve. You can see that I have taken something as a positive. But look again, there is one which I need to warn you. The area that is shaded again is to the left side of the curve only. Even if I take a positive value here, Z, area under the curve is always to the left side. Even if I take, like this is a 0 and I take +2 here, area to the left of the +2 is only taken into the picture. Now that is the one which we need to be very, very careful in understanding, analyzing that. It is never to the right side. If you want right side, it should take it as 1 minus that value. If somebody asks me that what is the area here, I know the total area is 1. Therefore, if I get this area minus 1 will give me this area. See, for example, if my Z value is equal to 0.75, 0.75. So this is 0.7. I get 0.75 is here, somewhere here, 0.7734. 0.7734 correspond to 0.05 and 0.7. So therefore 0.7734. You know what is the meaning of that? The area below this curve to the left side is 77.34%. If I want the area to the right side, what should I do? 1 minus 0.7734 will give me this value. That's the meaning of that. Okay. So I think it is very clear. If you want, I can just magnify a little more. I think this is going to be a good example to show you. It's magnified now completely. If I am going to take a value of 0.23, okay, what is 0.23? I need to take Z is equal to 0.2 here, 0.03 here. So that becomes a combination of 0.23, 0.5910. So when I say 0.5910, it means that this is my Z value is 0.23. Area to the left side of this is 0.5910. And if somebody asks me what is the area to the right side, then I should say 1 minus 0.5910. The question you should ask me that, why are we calculating this area? I'm going to come to that. That is the gist of it. If you calculate the area, I can understand the probability. That's all. Because this is a probability table. I hope all of you understood how to read the tables. Now what I will do is, I will just go back to the display. So you have both negative and positive here. And one more table I have shown only the positive values. These tables are readily available. You can just download. And in fact, if you go to the Excel sheet, you don't have to even worry. Just gives that value, it gives you the probability directly because there is a data analysis in the Excel sheet. Maybe if somebody is actually teaching you on how to use your Excel sheet for data analysis, or you can explore yourself. There are a lot many YouTubes on that. You give a Z value, automatically it gives you that area. So you don't have to use the table at all. Immediately it will give you that value. Okay. Now here also, quickly, if I can see, if somebody gives me that 1.03, I'll take 1.0 here and 0.3 here. Combination of that gives me this number. Okay, I think enough of it. Now I'll take a question here and then I'll show you how exactly you can make it up. Suppose the scores in an examination are normally distributed about the mean 65 and a standard deviation of 9, then what is the percentage of the scores for less than 50, at least 80, between 70 and 86 is a very good example to understand how do we actually use the statistics table to get some numbers up. I'll repeat again. Scores in an examination are normally distributed about the mean 65. So mean 65 is mu, correct? Mean 65. This is the population mu. 65. Standard deviation is sigma. Standard deviation is sigma. Question is, what percentage of the scores is less than 50, at least 80, between 70 and 86? We will take one by one. Now I am taking actually a value of less than 50, 54. So when I take that, anyway mu is 65 is given, mu 65 given, standard deviation is 9, standard deviation is 9, and then question asked is less than 54. So therefore I will put 54 here. So I will put 54. When I put 54, x is equal to 54, mu is equal to 65 by 9, I get minus 1.22. Now I think you know how to use the table, right? How do I use the table for z is equal to minus 1.22? Please go back to minus 1.2 and then 0.2 column. The combination of those two will give you minus 1.22. And when I do that, okay, when I do that, I will get minus 1.22 here, and I get the from the table as 0.1112 as the area. 0.1112 as the area. So now what this area represents to me? It says that the probability of getting the mass less than 54% is 11.12%. I think it is so simple to understand now. What did I do? I did a very simple. If I know the mean of the population, if I know the standard deviation of the population, and if I know what the question is less than 54, substitute z value, or find out z value into the z equation, go to the table, find the area below the z curve. That area will give you 1 minus this value, means in terms of less than percentage, convert it to percentage, you got less than 54. I think it's so simple of that. Now the question is, it is less than 54, that's why we took to the left side of it. We will see what do you mean by at least 80. You know what is at least 80 in the next cycle? When I say at least 80, area should be taken more than 80. Means minimum 80 should be there. So there should be more than 80. Now, how do we do that? Just take it down. Mu is equal to 65. Sigma is equal to 9. X given is 80. So when I take 80 minus 65 by 9, because 80 is the number as a question which I asked, 80, at least 80. 65 is the mean which is already given to me. Sigma is the 9 which is already given to me. Therefore, z is equal to 1.67. And therefore, go to the table here. 1.6 and 0.07 gives me 0.9525. When I take this 0.9525, what do I understand? 0.9525 is the area to the left side of this 1.651. Please do not think that this is actually 0.9525. Immediately, if you conclude that it is 95.25%, it is completely wrong. You should say that it is 0.9525 to the left of the z. Then to the right of the z, you have to take 1 minus of that. Look here. So to the right of that, I have taken 1 minus z. As you see here, 1 minus 0.9525 is 0.0475 or 4.75%. Now it is very, very clear for all of you. The question which we asked is, what is the percentage or what is the probability of having a score of at least 80? The probability is only 4.75%. Now there is a third question. Third question is between 70 and 86. How is the third question comes into picture? Have a look at it. So the third question is actually between 70 and 86. For 70, I calculate the z value as 0.56. And for 86, I calculate the value, which z value gives me 2.33. So now look at the table here. The z value for 0.56, this is 0.5 here, and 0.06, I get 0.7123. And for 2.3, I get 2.3, 0.03, 0.9901, I get two numbers. What are these two numbers representing? Initially, I will tell you something. If I take this 0.7123, it means that 0.56 value, this is my 0.56 value. To the left side of the curve, the total area is 0.7123. Similarly, if I take 2.33 here, to the left side of my 2.33 is 0.901. But my question is between 70 and 80, means I want only between these two. It's obvious then one minus the other, because this is the area from here to here, less than 2.3, completely this left side area. This is less than 0.56, is left side of the 0.56 area. So if I subtract one from the other, I get the intermediate value. It's as simple as that. So that is what I'm going to show here. The one is 0.9901, Another one is 0.7123. It comes to 0.2778. When I say 0.2778, it is 27.78% is the one which actually says an answer that it is between 70 and 86%. I think all of you understood, but we will revisit the problem again to say what is the problem, and then we will come back. These are the values which I should know. What is the mean of the student, and then deviation I should know. Okay, they're very simple. Most of you are the teachers. When you are taking a class of maybe 30 members, 40 members, 60 members, and results are recently out, please find out what is the mean and standard deviation. You can just find out from any statistical table. Question we ask then is, what is the percentage scores for less than 50 and at least 80 and between 70 and 86? The answer we got are these. When I say this is less than 50, it is about less than 54, 11.12% of the people are under this, and above that is only about 4.75%, above 80, and in between that we got 27.78%. So understanding this curve table, everything I think you understood. I hope this is a major thing how actually we can take a hypothesis, take a test and then check this. Now we will go to hypothesis testing. But before that, please understand once again the overall thing what we did. If you have a statement called less than, you can take the same area as it is. If it is given as more than, then you get an area less than, but 1 minus that less than value will give you this. That's the meaning of it. If you have in between, then both of them give you less than area or the left side area. 1 minus the other will give you in between value. So you have to subtract the areas. I think it's very clear and very, very understandable. Now, what do you mean by rejection? Part of it. I think I have another 15 minutes or so because I need to give you for questionnaire as well. So I will take up this. I think I can finish easily, no problem. My timing is good. I will take a statement here. A machine produces a metal roller ball of 6 mm. I'm coming back to the same thing. Employee opines that the machine is no longer producing the roller balls of 6 mm. The testing will be done by taking a random sample of 1000 balls with a confidence level of 98%. Write the hypothesis statement, first one. So I think we wrote the hypothesis statement earlier. H0 mu is equal to 6 mm and H1 is equal to mu is not equal to 6 mm because the question says it is not no longer, means it is either less or more. Therefore, it is not equal. Okay, alternate hypothesis statement is written like this. Okay. Now, the testing will be done by taking the random sample of 1000 balls with a confidence level of 98%. And once I write the statement, I have taken this one. What is the probability that the balls chosen randomly show a diameter less than 5.8 mm, more than 6.3 mm, and in between 6.1 and 6.2 mm? I think it's very, very easy for you. And the standard deviation is given as 4. The mean diameter is given as 6. So the Z is going to be, therefore, mu value is known, sigma is known. The X value will be once it is 5.8, another one is 6.3, another one is 6.1 and 6.2, like what we did earlier, isn't it? So once you do that, therefore, C alpha is equal to, the C is equal to alpha, the confidence level is 98%. I get the Z value, and then I will go to the next level, less than 5.8 region. So the 5.8 region, less than 5.8 region, I have taken 5.8 here, 6 here, minus 0.05. I go to the table for Z is equal to minus 0.05. Left to the table, I get 0.4801. I think immediately you can understand when I ask less than 5.8 mm, what is the percentage of the balls that I'm going to get it here? Probability is 0.48. The percentage is therefore 48.01% because it's on the left hand side, because the question itself is less than. Okay. And next I will take the question more than 6.3. Now I need to check actually to the right side of the curve. So therefore the Z value, Z is equal to X minus mu. 6.3 is the X now, 0.075. It has become positive anyway. This positive is only to check the data in the table. Don't worry about whether a positive means always right side. No, it could be negative, but this positive says that actually it is a positive value in the table. That's all, nothing more than that. Okay. The area to the left of Z, it always gives you left of Z. Once again, I'm telling you, whatever the area you get from the table is only always on the left side. It gives me 0.5319. Don't take this value as it is. What should I do? I should take actually 1 minus this value. It comes to 0.4681. and therefore the value of that is 46.81%. I think all of you are understanding now very clearly. Use the table and then calculate this probability with whenever the question is asked as more than 1 minus the left side value is going to be 46.81%. So let me go back and again see what was the percentage earlier. 48% if it is less than 5.8, and I got this one as 46.81% for more than 6.3 mm as the ball size. Third question was there. What was the third question? Third question is in between 6.1 and 6.2. I do both actually. 6.1 I get 0.025. To the left side of that from the table I get 0.5120. And similarly for 6.2, I take the left side of the value as 0.05. Z equals 0.05. For Z equals 0.05, area to the left of the plus Z, 0.025 is 0.5199. Now it is in between. When I want in between, what should I do? Just subtract one by the other. And when I subtract, I get basically 0.079. 0.079 multiplied by 100 is 0.79%. So this is only what I am going to tell you, that it has a 0.79% is the thing. So I think all of you have understood now very clearly, like how do we actually go for the probability in understanding the hypothesis test. Now there are in the hypothesis testing, there is something called two-tailed and one-tailed test. Before going to that, I just wanted to tell you, why did I take up this? This is not exactly the hypothesis, though it's a hypothesis, I didn't take it up, mainly because I wanted to show how exactly these, the left side and right side, the table is chosen. Now I'll go back here to what do you call one-tailed test and two-tailed test. Same question which I asked here. For example, in a null hypothesis, if it is greater than or equal to mu naught, mu is greater than or equal to mu naught, versus alternate hypothesis H1 is equal to mu less than or equal to mu naught, it is upper or right-tailed or one-tailed. So that means basically the curve is taken to the right side of it. So it becomes a one single-tailed test, but it's on the right side. A one-tailed test is the one where I'm going to check the probability for only one side of the curve. That is called one-tailed test. And suppose the null hypothesis is something like mu less than or equal to mu naught, and the alternate hypothesis is mu is greater than 1 naught. It is on the lower value, so it is left-tailed, till it is one tail only. So it comes to the left-hand side now. So this is what we call, in the hypothesis, you can have one-tailed test or two-tailed test. If you have your hypothesis stating that some occurrences is more than something, that is a hypothesis which you are giving as H naught, then it is called right-sided one-tailed test. Suppose you are assuming hypothesis as less than some value, then it becomes left side of this particular one. Now for null hypothesis, for an alternate hypothesis, if I say mu is equal to mu naught and mu is not equal to mu naught, it is called a two-tailed hypothesis. So I think understood, it is in between now. So the mu value becomes the center and it's exactly equal to, so therefore the alternate hypothesis takes you as H1 is equal to mu naught equal to H naught. I think this is what we call one-tailed and two-tailed test. And then how do we test it? It's a very simple process. First, you should state H0 and H1, specify the level of significance, decide the correct sampling distribution, whether it is Z, T, or etc. At present, Z I have taken, there is a normal distribution. Sample a random out of that, calculate the probability using the equation. If the probability equal to or smaller than the value in case of one-tailed test, by 2, in this case, two-tailed test. That's all. I think that's a very simple one which I just made it. I will go with an example and then I'll close my talk here and then you can keep asking me a question on this. A certain chemical process is said to have produced 15 or less pounds of waste material every 60 pounds batch with a corresponding standard deviation of 5 pounds. You know what do you mean by that? There is a there is a chemical which I'm buying 60 pounds. Out of that, 15 pounds is going to be a wastage. And in the statistics, the study, they found that the standard deviation of this study is about 5 pounds. So this is the population, and this is the 5 pounds is the standard deviation, and that's the mean. The random sample of 100 batches gives an average of 16 pounds of waste per batch. Test at 10% level whether the average quantity of the waste per batch has increased or not. compute the power of the test for mu is equal to 16 pounds. And if we rise the level of significance, that's the second question. I'll go one by one. We want to test the hypothesis that the average quantity of the waste per batch is 60 pounds is 15. So I write the statement like this. H naught mu is less than or equal to 15 and mu is greater than 15. Now I think probably you will be trying to understand what type of test is it. Something is less than or equal to. So what sided test it is? Or single sided or double sided or what sided it is? This is a question to all of you. If you want to actually prove null hypothesis, it is less than or equal to, that means it is going to be a left-tailed, one-tailed problem. So therefore, we are going to take that equation and H naught if X bar is less than or equal to 15 plus 1.28 is from the table which I got from the normal curve, or 15.64, so 10% of the level of this significance, otherwise HN. There is something called here alpha p by root n. You may be wondering how these numbers are coming here, and I never used it so far. I will tell you this comes in what is called T distribution. In a T distribution, it's slightly changed from the normal distribution, where actually we take up this root n coming into picture, and alpha p is basically, where did I get this alpha p from? Where, what is this phi coming from? Where is the phi coming from here? Where is the phi coming from here? Can you just guess that value? Where is the phi coming from here? I'll just leave it to you. Just find out where the phi is coming from. So 10% of significant level, otherwise you accept H naught. So this is the way actually we say for left-sided. Sample average is 16 pound, and then you are going to get this particular type of final, the table with a normal curve. So I find that nearly 76.42 is a rejection region. So if any sample lies in this particular region, I'm going to reject it because it was less than or equal to, and anything which it comes here, it is the acceptance region. So that means any data which comes under this particular one will be chosen as accepted. Any data which comes under this will be taken as rejection region. So this is what I just wanted to summarize. So I started with, how do you start your humanities humanity research problem? First, you need to define a problem. And once you define a problem, ask a question, make a questionnaire. Means you need to actually make a questionnaire to suit that particular, the research which you are going through. That questionnaire is a cycle, I told you earlier. That questionnaire is to be refined again after going to the stakeholders, getting the data, and going back, data crunching, and then redoing it. After doing all that, you will come to statistics. Use a statistical tool basically to whatever the hypothesis you are going to make, either to accept the hypothesis or reject the hypothesis, and that is going to give you the final outcome. I think I made it as simple as possible in this 1.5 hours. And basically, if you are looking for more of these types of, things, there are a lot many YouTubes available. Directly, you can just get into the YouTubes now. If you write hypothesis testing, and I can also give you some, because there are more than 100 of them, I can give you some good links where actually you can get exactly what is needed for your problem. Further, if there is anyone having a research problem, which you can ask me a question now, also possible that I will be taking it up. So if you are having any question, you can come back. I have just unshared my presentation. So if there are any questions, please come back.
Sure.
The mediocre teacher tells.
Can you switch on your video, Dr. Supriya?
Yes, sir.
Now your net is okay, yes.
Yes, sir. The mediocre teacher tells. The good teacher explains. The superior teacher demonstrates. And the great teacher inspires. We are glad to let you know that Dr. Sridhara is a teacher who not only demonstrates, but also inspires. Thank you very much, sir, for an excellent presentation. Before the interactive session I start, I would like to complete introduction of Dr. S.N. Sridhara. Due to net problem, Dr. S.N. Sridhara introduction could not be completed. Dr. S.N. Sridhara, Director, MIT School of Engineering and Technology, MIT University, Haryana. He has done his ME in Aerospace Engineering from Indian Institute of Science in 1992 and PhD in Aerospace Engineering from Indian Institute of Science in 2000. He was lecturer professor in BMS College of Engineering, Bangalore from 1987 to 2005. Professor and Dean in MS Ramaiah School of Advanced Studies from 2005 to 2010. He worked as a principal and director in KS School of Engineering and Management from 2010 to 2018. He has number of publications to his credit, including 2 textbooks, 30 international journal publications, 20 international conference presentations, 20 national conference presentation. He has successfully completed research and consultancy project worth rupees 75 lakhs. He has imparted corporate training to TVS, Mahindra, Bose, Infosys, Schneider, etc. He delivered guest lectures, keynote addresses more than 75 times, targeting various audiences. He is expert in educational management, educational accreditation, organizing international conferences. He has participated in counseling programs for 10 plus 2 students in TV shows in several channels and occasions. He has been awarded with Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan National Award for Best Engineering College Principal in 2015 during 45 ISTE Indian Society for Technical Education National Annual Convention held on 10th January 2016. Excellent Principal in Karnataka 2016 during second National Karnataka Education Summit and award ceremony held on 14th March 2016 at VTU, jointly awarded by CMAI Association of India and VTU. He also received Vocational Excellence Award in 2014 from Rotary Bangalore for Excellence in Education Service at Dendete. Now, thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. Now the floor is open for question and answers. Now may I request our respected Director, Professor Sanjay Kumar Jha, to moderate the interactive session. Floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Dr. Supriya. I think Dr. Sridhara, thank you very much for your brilliant presentation. You have already sensitized us, to many concepts, and you have also shown your generosity by saying that you will extend your help to all the needy researchers in our campus and even outside. And I really feel that we should have, more and more, problem-centric, workshops, in which our participants, could raise some issues, statistical issues related to the research, So having said that, now the session is open for question and answer. And I had seen a few questions which uh, some of them were not exactly questions, but some reflections were there. And just I will read a few of them. Like Tamil Selvi, Dr. Tamil Selvi, she had said that null hypothesis in nursing is written in other way round, So she had that observation. Then one observation which I would like to raise here, that it's from Dr. Shiv Swarup Jha. Dear sir, under what basis 68% of the total value falls under first standard deviation of the mean, then 95% of value under second standard deviation of the mean, and finally 99.7% of the value fall under third standard deviation. Is there any basis for this?
Yeah, I will take up this question basically. If you remember, basically we showed a Z curve, means the curve equation, which goes like x minus mu by sigma. So it's a mathematical entity. When I put that sigma and then draw this curve, automatically it comes to that particular 68%. So that is the mathematical basis behind that 1 sigma 68%, 2 sigma 98.5%, and 99.7%, and so on. If time permits, I'll just quickly go to that particular screen again, and just a minute. Just 1 minute. I'll come to that immediately to explain this. So now you could have seen this particular one. Just 1 minute. The curve itself actually mathematically, it shows that exactly how the area under these curves will be coming through. In fact, what I suggest is if you are user of an Excel, now you can see this particular one. This is the question which he was asking. So when I say this 1 sigma to minus 1 sigma to plus sigma, how it exactly 68.3%. Now I wrote an equation for this curve. That equation curve goes like z is equal to x minus 1 over 2 sigma 2 pi root of 2 pi e to the power something. Automatically these points are defined, and when I define and try to find out the area under this curve by numerical method or whatever the method, those curves area exactly comes to 68.3. So this is the mathematical part of it, and that goes by mathematics of it only. I'll show that equation. It is in the further one. This is the equation which I was mentioning, that the curve on the x-axis goes like your x-axis here, and then that is a y, f of x is y, mu and 2 sigma. So you keep on varying that mu and 2 sigma, automatically this curve will be going through. And when I do that in the Excel sheet and then try to find out between these two, this area will be exactly 68.3%. And there is one funny thing in this. The funny thing is, this is 99.7% for 3 sigma. What about the other point? The other point is, remember, for a normal curve, it is impossible to have a cojoint or the meeting point of this curve with the x-axis. It will never join. That's a mathematical thing. And if you say 6 sigma, it is going to be 0.99999, but it is not 100%. Probably you would have heard something like 0.9999. It comes to that. So that is the answer for it.
Fine. One question was from Tanisha, that can you explain significance level also when it helps us to retain and reject? I think the question perhaps is not that clear. Well, one question is from Dr. Pallavi. She's asking you, can you explain the calculations using social science case?
Yeah, social science problems, I'll tell you, see, I took a machine problem. You could have taken, the problem with the so that's what I'm meaning. Professor Zah sir, actually, if there are any problems which are actually identified by your faculty, if they can interact with me, I will actually frame it as a statistical problem and I can guide them through.
Excellent.
It will be much easier.
Excellent. Then Nahid Sabah is asking you that can you tell us which statistical tools we can use for data analysis? We find SPSS very difficult to understand and use.
Yeah, I think it looks like it's difficult. SPSS is a famous one. But I'll tell you one thing, you can also use Excel sheet. Excel is a very awesome. It can do everything what SPSS can do. But in SPSS, if you start using it, some of the functions are really easier. In Excel sheet, you need to go through that. What I suggest is if you are unable to access SPSS because it's a commercial tool, you can go to the YouTube where people are using Excel sheet for data analysis and you can do everything in that. It's a very simple one. Maybe another session may be required to make use of that Excel sheet.
True, Dr. Sridhara. I think we need to have more and more sessions from you, because this session, I feel it was very good for sensitization on statistical aspects. But we need to learn many things, right from scratch. This is what we feel, and our researchers also feel, because many a time they have been requesting me that we need some experts, who could teach us, all these stats right from scratch, like when to use any particular tools, why to use. So these questions remain in their minds, sir. So I think some of the questions are there, but they may not be very relevant. And given the time constants also, I think our session will end at sharp 5 o'clock. And we have little formality by Dr. Hemant Jha also. I think some word of thanks So I think I will give the floor back to Dr. Supriya, and definitely this is a good beginning, and we will continue it in future as well. Thank you,
Sir.
Dr. Silvira.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Now I request Dr. Hemant Kumar Jha, Coordinator, Department of English, to propose vote of thanks.
Really, it was a great opportunity, am I audible? Am I?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes, it was a great opportunity, Before meeting Dr. Sridhara, I had read only one book of research methodology, that was Ranjit Kumar, the basic step-to-step guide for beginners, And I remember the first sentence of that book, that research is a way of life. And there are many things. But when I started talking and interacting to Dr. Sridhara, I was exposed to several times I've heard him talking, and every time, it was a learning opportunity. It was an enlightening experience, And even today, for example, Sridhara talked a lot of things, I enlightened myself by the definition of hypothesis. That is a claim that we want to taste, how simple the definition is, And he talked about your research design. He talked about data collection. He talked about procedure. He talked about curve fitting. These were standard deviations. These were the terms that I didn't know. But I'm really happy that I came to know about these things. One more thing I would like to add. Someone talked about that problem in the social science. He has already mentioned one problem in his discussion today. That identifying the influence of co-curricular activities on the performance of children. This was one example that he had explained and talked about. I think this leads us to understand and develop the problem for the social sciences. We are really thankful to Dr. Sridhara. Last night I was a little hesitant while talking to him, but he was always there, supporting, talking, helping. Thank you, Dr. Sridhara. We expect many more sessions from you in the future. It was enriching, it was enlightening, and it was highly informative. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank our honorable director for motivating, encouraging, and always, organizing such kind of talk, And, one credit I would like to give him, basically, for example, before I came to Amity and before I came to interact with him, I was only a teacher, basically teaching English literature, teaching English communication for the last, 30 years, But now I became a teacher researcher. And, the credit goes to our honorable director, Dr. S.K. Jha. Very, very, supporting and motivating personality. I would like to thank, for example, our, Supriya ma'am. Without her help, I can't do things. I'm a useless person, you can say. But Supriya ma'am is always there, and whenever she's there, I'm 100% confident that things will be done, very fine. I would like to do the participants. Students, our fellow colleagues, especially I would like to thank, one of my, colleagues, especially, one of my friends, Dr. Nahid Sabah, she's from Saudi Arabia, she consented to participate in the activities, Thank you, Nahid ma'am, and other participants, students, faculty members, and all the people. I would like to thank for example, Mr. Rahul, technical support team, and his team, for supporting and for maintaining, and for doing all these things in a seamless manner. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you, sir. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Once again, I would like to thank our resource person and all the attendees present in the webinar today to making it a great success. Thank you very much. Namaskar.